So once again, thank you guys for joining. This is training for the latest release of CloudBlue Connect version 26. We typically do those trainings for each and every release. And you can actually go to our Confluence page and see recordings of previous releases. It might help you to understand what was developed, what was released, and everything. Right. So, and by the way, let me open up chat window. This release was unusually long for us. It was, well, for some objective and non-objective reasons, because it was essentially the period during which we were relocating our teams from Russia and a lot of uncertainty during the period, so we were not able to release sooner. So as a, well, good and bad side effect of this release actually contains a lot of changes. So it's more than 6 months of development of our whole team. And de facto, release 26 is our most feature-rich release to date in terms of the number of changes. Well, if we will try to review all those features in a single training, that the only thing that we can expect from all of you that your heads will explode and we will not have audience to attend our meetings anymore. So the way we will approach this is, instead of doing a single monolithic training for all the features that we have in this release, we will have multiple focus trainings for some specific features. We will cover highlights or features today, obviously, but for some of the features that are more technical in nature, have smaller audience, potentially we will just schedule separate meetings. We will record them and publish recordings separately, and you can attend and ask questions separately. Otherwise, it's just too difficult logistically. So for today's discussion, for release 26 highlights, we have planned the discussion of 2 areas. And those areas by themselves are quite broad, so it will take some time for us to discuss them and cover them in details, so brace yourself. And as usual, please feel free to ask questions in chat. And better to do that in chat, with the exception of those moments when essentially I'm asking for verbal questions, right? And the second feature that we will cover today is not single feature per se, but kind of a grouping of features in the same area that we refer to as development framework in general. And well, we will start with the billing framework, and then we will discuss those development scenarios. So first of all, for the billing framework, let me help you to build the overall landscape behind this feature and what problem are we trying to solve for our customers. So we have our actors in the platform, right, from vendor to distributor and reseller, and they automate certain supply chain scenarios with us, as usual, and you probably saw those diagrams in our documentation per se, right? And they are doing it through a lot of systems. So when we look at those scenarios, one thing that is very important to know is that in most cases, if not all cases, those actors are not just like performing certain like product flows or fulfillment flows, but actually they're transacting business. So they're actually selling certain stuff from one actor to another, right? And in the most complex case, there might be up to 4 different business transactions in such supply chain, right? A vendor would sell something to a distributor will sell something to a reseller, and then maybe even the reseller sells something to end customer. Obviously, in many cases of our partners, the supply chain is smaller, but nevertheless, it's important to understand this. And what's also important to realize is that when it comes to subscriptions, those are actually also implemented as like tiered recurring billing, right? So we don't just have one subscription per se. We have a subscription on each layer, right? We have a subscription that is operated by the vendor. We have a subscription that is operated by the distributor and by the reseller, right? So even more importantly, each of those interactions involves accounts receivable and accounts payable management, if you think about this, right? So a vendor issues an invoice to distributor, and that invoice is calculated by the vendor. I mean, quite obviously, which generates accounts receivable data from the vendor side and accounts payable vendor from the distributor side. Then distributor does the same on the next layer of the supply chain, and so forth. What's also important here is that obviously all of that happens through certain systems that are operated by vendor, distributor, or reseller, right? And vendor systems are responsible for generation of this invoice with accounts receivable, accounts payable data that goes to the next layer. And distributor systems are responsible for their part and so forth. Right? Again, I hope quite obvious. That's why I'm going slow. Now, we have this landscape in which our partners have certain subscription management system that generates that data quite typically, right? And when we look at the actual data flows in those systems, we will quickly discover something like this conceptually, right? But again, we have a subscription on the vendor side that quite literally generates certain like billing data, invoices or some invoices accompanied with reconciliation files that are periodically sent to their partners, to distributor, which is then received by the accounts payable team, right? Then, dependently or independently from this process, something very similar happens on the next layer of the supply chain, on the distributor side, right? Where certain subscription management engine generates those invoices or billing data files that are being sent to the accounts payable team on the reseller side, and maybe even this process repeats itself one more time from reseller to the customer, the process which I'm not showing here intentionally, right? When we look at this diagram, one very important question that we need to ask ourselves and our customers is like how this cost and revenue flows from the distributor side are being reconciled. This question is, well, sounds trivial, but it's not, because when we dig into those details and work with our customers, very often we discover that this process happens actually manually, and this process is quite painful from multiple angles to our customers. And this is where, unfortunately, because we cannot expect everyone to have the same basic understanding of those processes, I need to make a small derail from the main flow of the conversation and explain you where those complexities are coming from, right? Because reconciliation of cost and revenue and their complexities in the world of subscriptions. So first of all, let me explain you the difference between reconciliation processes in traditional business processes and recurring revenue business processes, right? Again, conceptually, just not to overcomplicate things. If you look at the typical consumption process of the traditional goods, you will discover conceptual chart like this, where you have certain consumption of goods. Let's say you buy laptops or you buy licenses for your software, and typically the purchases are happening relatively rare, right, in terms of the period, and they cover a certain period until the consumption like reaches the same peak, and then kind of the process repeats itself. And typically, kind of again, the average size of those invoices is larger than in the recurring world that we will see and well, it goes to CapEx, like capital investment kind of consumption, typically, right? Then when you look at the recurring revenue, again, if you compare it to traditional, typically, again, the sheer number of invoices will be much larger, and the average size, volume of that invoice will be smaller. And so again, and typically this will go to the OpEx kind of model. So when we compare those two approaches, again, just to highlight, we will discover a few things. First of all, the amount of invoice in the recurring revenue is smaller. The number of invoices is much higher, sometimes like by the order of magnitude, right? By 12, by the number of 12 or even more. And the complexity of reconciliation between those invoices is actually much higher, because on the recurring revenue side, there is additional dimension of how certain values are being calculated, which is represented by the axis of time, which is not obvious, but adds a lot of complexity. And just to sum it up, from the Price Waterhouse Cooper like business effectiveness research, we know that even in traditional business goods, like up to a third of finance team capacity at average is spent on reconciliation, right? So we're looking at in the big company, like dozen people doing those processes. But when it comes to recurring revenue processes, unfortunately for those people who kind of have to transition to this, the amount of efforts that is required to be spent on recurring revenue easily kind of by the order of magnitude higher than with the traditional processes. And well, one of the reasons why it happens that way is that just the proration logic alone adds kind of a huge number of possible variations and treatments of kind of revenue and cost lines for them. So again, as a kind of, probably you don't need to remember all that, but as a kind of conclusion that we want to make here, and a very important one, is that as businesses transition to recurring revenue models from traditional ones, their reconciliation efforts grow significantly unless automated, right? So when businesses grow and move to this traditional recurring consumption model, they either need to hire a lot of people doing those reconciliation processes manually, or they need to automate this process, because like otherwise it just doesn't, this problem doesn't disappear. So if we look at this diagram once again, where we have those two flows of cost and revenue, one very important conclusion that we need to make is that some automation process, or at least kind of huge quantity of people that will be doing reconciliation, is absolutely essential in between, right? Between those two flows. And just pure mathematically, there are only two high-level options for automation there. Like, first of all, those two layers could be calculated independently, or they could be calculated dependently. One layer could be calculated based on another. If you kind of look at the possibilities, there are no others. And again, here probably we will not dive too back into our background because we have years of experience. But for our platform, we've decided not to go down the first route of independent calculation because we believe it's a dead end in terms of like architecture and scalability of what we can achieve, because there's just too many permutations of what needs to be supported. And we've decided to support derivative calculation of layers, where distributor can actually calculate the data billed to the resellers and customers based on the vendor data. So essentially, kind of this brings us to this overall topic of our billing framework, which allows to set up billing data transformations between accounts within the platform, right? And let me kind of get back to where we started from, and I hope I still didn't lose most of you, at least because I understand that it might be difficult to follow, right? So we have those business relationships between actors in our platform. And what we need to realize also is that when it comes to financial processes, there are different layers of data that is being treated differently. So when it comes to our platform, we only discuss journal level entries, right? We're discussing transactions that need to be collected across the supply chain, then that later need to be treated in the ERP system. So we do not try to replace the ERP system here, right? The one that issues invoices, applies payments, kind of all of that. But those systems do need the journal level entries in order to operate. So this is what CloudBlue Connect provides to the supply chain with this feature. So when we look at those sectors, again, just to explain you what we did, when it comes to the actual data flows, it works in a very primitive way, like we said, conceptually. Vendor generates an invoice, say Office 365 subscription, right? For every Office 365 subscription, Microsoft will generate billing data that it periodically sends to a distributor, right? Distributor will receive this data, and then distributor will process this data, will add markups, maybe will apply margins with a lot of different rules, right? Different margins for different customers per se, different resellers, and will send it down the line to reseller. Reseller will repeat this process, right? Maybe will apply their own margins, they will apply some custom pricing, but as a derivative of the data from the previous layer, which is very important. Same goes with the pricing data, and in reality, they very often go side by side. Same goes with different types of data in this domain, which is very often treated in a similar way to the level of, say, inventory files that are being sent. So with this feature in CloudBlue Connect, we support implementation of such derivative data processing flows, focused on billing, of course, but applicable to other scenarios. So when you look at the high-level data structures in them, so what we support on the level of the platform is the concept of a stream that could be derived from another stream, and that allows to set up such transformations. Right? So essentially, vendors can create streams, then they can share those streams with distributors. Distributors can either consume those streams created by vendors or create their own streams derived from streams on the vendor side, and even pass streams to resellers down the line if they need it. Same goes with different types of data, right? And that's why with this whole range of functionality of our platform, one can implement billing management scenarios, price management scenarios, and create custom data streams management that might be required for some of our customers. So we have those different layers of data ingestion, transformation, and processing. Some key terminology that we need to remember from this, and probably you can refer to our documentation for that. First of all, the data streams management here, we refer to as the process of transferring table-based data from vendors to the supply chain layers in order to implement different business scenarios. Right? What's important is that, again, we implement this transformation of table-like data across the supply chain. And by transformation, we mean the process of applying different functions like rating, right, and multiplication of line by price, or conversions of currencies, lookups, data enrichment, splits of columns, like whatever we need to implement a particular business process. So when you look at our functionality from the technical point of view, conceptually, again, we allow our partners to build those pipelines, streams of data transformations from vendors to their system that will be reconcilable end to end, because one is derived from another. Right? And by doing that, they automatically reconcile their data, also solving their business scenarios. And so conceptually, with this module, it's inevitable that they have to write kind of some extension functionality that will bring this billing data. Right? This doesn't happen magically, right? So that's why one of the main next steps for this whole feature in our ecosystem would be to support this feature in our connectors. But once supported, vendors can share this data with distributors, right? And then distributors can either use this data to export to the ERP system for billing directly, excuse me, or set up additional transformation layers down the line. So when it comes to business scenarios, I think, well, it's already been like 30 minutes talking about this topic, or 25 minutes. I think you're already quite tired. So let me pause here for a second and see if anyone has any questions before we move on, because otherwise it might be like overwhelming. Any questions so far kind of to the overall landscape and feature? Well, all right, no questions. So either I lost you already, or kind of it's clear, or kind of or both. Right. Either way, let me try to then briefly go through scenarios, and before we proceed to other features. So in the overall landscape of actors in our platform, billing functionality starts with the product, obviously, and fulfillment automation extension, right? Quote unquote, the connector. It always starts with the vendor. So it has to start with the vendor in order for this product to support this. And obviously, since it starts with the product on the vendor side, it's always linked with certain product listing and marketplace in order to be shared with the distributor. So to put it simply, only products that are visible to distributor can they kind of start receiving billing data for. Well, quite natural, I would say, right? Then vendors create data streams, and they create them in the scope of the specific marketplace and product. And then they can set up, they can make those streams visible to distributors, right? So kind of by default, they are not, but they can actually go and make those streams visible to distributors. Once they're visible, basically distributors can see this data in their account, in the user interface, and work with it. Then on the distributor side, in the simplistic case, they can just use this data and export this to their own systems. As for many of our partners, this is the only layer that's required, because the actual billing of their customers happens in their own ERP system or their own billing system. They just need to receive this data for what their customer needs to be invoiced. Or alternatively, distributors can choose to set up additional streams to perform, let's say, the actual reseller price calculation or customer side price calculations on our side before exporting to the system. Or kind of in the ultimate, most complex scenario, they can even make this data visible to resellers in the platform. And then this data will be visible by resellers, and maybe those resellers will also want to modify this data before applying it to their customers' invoices. So ultimately, we can have up to those 3 layers of data transformations in the platform. Right, in the most complex case, from vendor to distributor to reseller. Sorry, let me read the question. Amit is asking, you said Connect will allow to enter journals for billing. So how this can be used in ERP? Like, will Connect allow to extract data via report or via API? Well, we will obviously support both. Kind of, it's possible. You will not have to create custom reports, most likely, because the feature itself already has APIs and very ERP-friendly data integration layer. Most likely, you will have to create some extension or integration here, because depending on the ERP system, the process of export here is slightly different, right? But this integration will have to use API of this module. So literally, kind of, this extension will work with the API of these data streams to export data. Now, when it comes to data streams themselves, data stream is a logical concept, that an object in the platform that one can create. And essentially, it consists of a few things, right? It consists of input column configuration, output column configurations, and transformations in the middle. Right? And once you have this object, you can create multiple batches in the scope of this data stream. And each batch is upload of data from the source, right? On the vendor side, it will be export of data from the billing system. On the distributor side, it will be potentially a kind of output of the previous layer, right? That's why billing streams can potentially be nested. So one billing stream can derive from another. And that's why they kind of will have a simple billing stream that doesn't derive from anyone, the one that is created by vendor, or computer streams, the one that derive their data from the previous layer. Now, from the configuration point of view, essentially it all comes to columns within that file, right? So we have certain columns that are kind of come from input, potentially then modified with certain transformations, and then some of them are stored in the output. And I don't want to overwhelm you entirely. I will not be digging too deep into this, but you just need to remember that each column always has just a single origin, meaning that like you always know kind of where this column came from, but it could be used in multiple transformations. Right? The same column, let's say with the price, might be used in multiple modifications. The same column that refers to some identifier might be used for multiple lookups. And it's user who defines which column actually gets stored in the output. Right? So it's possible to hide certain columns. For example, to hide the, let's say, vendor cost from the next layer of distribution. Right? You don't want, say, Ingram Micro price to be visible to reseller layer, and things of that kind. Now, transformations themselves will be an open framework to which others will be able to add their own functions. We are currently working to publish this SDK. It's not yet live, kind of with all the changes, because I will show you why it's not a problem right now, because we first need to add those data streams to products. But once we publish this, the types of transformations will be supported there kind of are the ones that I'm showing, right? It will be possible to apply just simple copy operations to columns. It will be possible to split columns based on certain regular expression. It will be possible to perform lookup of subscription data based on certain identifier. Right? It will be possible to look up subscription data based on parameters. It will be possible to look up product item data, for example, right? Or again, just kind of to apply mathematical formulas, right? Like if you have two columns with price and tax, kind of calculate the total price with tax. lookup from external sources like Airtables and such, currency conversions, VAT rate retrievals and calculations. Those will be typical examples of transformations that you will do, right? Now, we are 34 minutes into the training. Let me briefly show you the live demo. Again, I think by now, well, judging by the amount of questions, you are overwhelmed with all this information. Let me show you how it will look like. Like the transformations feature as an SDK, we already have it on GitHub. As a part of the platform, Luis, answering your question, we will have it in the scope of the next release. So in a few months. The thing is that all of those transformations are only valuable when the course data is in the platform, right? Again, to the next topic in my conversation, we hope that within the next few months, we will be able to update this most connectors, so some most important connectors to bring this course data into the platform. Because otherwise, all those transformations will be irrelevant. So, speaking of the live demo, let me let's move here to a separate screen, and well, let's use just this simple example. First of all, this functionality is available as a part of the commerce management module in Connect. And since we will have different types of data here for pricing and custom data in the future, so we had to come up with a certain name that will be uniquely identifiable. Streams are created here and only created by vendor. So here I am within the vendor account, and that's why I can create an outbound stream. By outbound, it means that it will be potentially shared with some other account. And vendors could not have inbound streams, obviously. Only distributors and resellers can. So when creating a stream, essentially streams could be, like we discussed, is a simple or computed ones. And we need to specify certain key attributes, right? We need to specify the name, let's say my billing data for product. And then we need to choose product and partner and marketplace, obviously. That's why we really need to take into consideration the fact like what's listed where, right? So in this particular test account, let's say we can take, let's say my alpha product, which is listed with Connect Demos account in the United States marketplace, right? As an option. So when we go back to data streams and click create streams, and this will be my alpha product for Connect Demos in the United States marketplace, right? And this will be billing data for like alpha product. We can populate some randomly generated description. And in order to create this data stream, we need to provide a sample data file, which will be inspected by the platform, and columns will be derived from it. So I will use some auto-generated example. And well, essentially, if you want to look up what's in this file, it's relatively large, that's why it takes some time to show, right? It will be kind of a typical example of the billing file with, you know, like 50 or 60 columns of different data. Sorry, kind of it's large, so kind of it takes some time to load in my preview. That's an example of what we will use. We create data stream based on that. In a minute after it will process and upload. And this creates our billing stream object, right? In the billing stream object, it currently analyzes the input to determine which columns are there and stuff. So now it was processed, right? And we have a data stream that is potentially ready to be used. So we can see which columns were detected by the platform, and we can choose which columns will be stored in the output. By default, the stream is not visible to anyone. It is private. We can also switch it to active mode, meaning that we can start creating the actual billing batches there. And well, essentially, kind of with this, we can even make it visible to distributor. We can make it shared, and the stream will be visible to distributor, meaning that if we switch to our distributor, we will see the stream as an inbound for the distributor. Now, actually, you can see that the stream is the inbound section for the distributor. So if we switch back to the vendor, on the vendor side, we can now start uploading billing batches, right? So we can create a new billing batch, and this will be billing for what? For November. And this is where we essentially upload the actual data for billing, and it will be processed by the platform. Once recognized, it will be made visible to the distributor. Right. Well, this is the step which we expect the actual fulfillment automation extensions to automate. Because if this has to be done manually for each partner, this is quite a lot of labor. But kind of once automated, it should be pretty straightforward. Right. So we expect that this piece will be done by our automation, so that partners receive this cost data automatically. And that's it. Essentially, we just created a stream and shared it with the partner. So now on the partner side, we just received a new bidding file that we will be able to see once it's processed, I guess. Anyway, let's save time on this. It's just been still being processed. Sorry, kind of, because that file is relatively large, the one that I uploaded. Now, again, what's important here is that, like I said, answering the question of Luis, in order for this whole data flow and business flow to work, we need our connectors to start supporting this functionality. Because without this data in the platform, we don't have cost data, and there are no transformations to be applied. So with this release, the platform supports this. And our first very important step of this is to actually update our connectors in order to start ingesting this data. Maybe not for all of them, but we hope that it will be added to the roadmap of our key connectors to actually support this capability and feature of the platform. Now, that's pretty much what we wanted to share regarding the overall billing framework feature. Now, let me stop here for another minute and see if you have any questions. Laura was asking something. Let me read this in a second. I recently was made of a situation where the seller noted that the month's price used to calculate the discount was incorrect. Are these features in the platform that partners overlook that lead to these types of billing adjustments at the end of the year? Kind of, we are intentionally creating this this feature as a framework, essentially. So those kind of custom calculations, we will be able to support them even like partner specific if we want. So answering your question, like, well, in many of those cases, we will not even have the problem in the first place, because we are, with this approach, we are using vendor data for calculations, and the effective Microsoft price will be used for calculation. Right? Our recommendation will be to not use the price on the distributor side, but the margin. And the margin will remain the same, even though the price will be new, most likely. So again, most likely, if we use the derivative calculation based on vendor data, this problem that you are describing, Laura, will not even exist. But we need to look into those details later. All right, I presume there are no more questions about this. And now let's discuss our development framework in a bit more details. Like I said, it's not a single feature, but a combination of multiple features that we need to cover. And let's discuss them one by one. Well, the first feature in this group is called Hub Integration Extension. Now, what we mean by that is, again, when we look at our typical landscape of systems and in the ecosystem, is that prior to this release, for those of you who are using our DevOps module, it was not possible to create extensions in the scope of distributor and reseller. Only vendor scope was supported, right? So distributors and resellers were not even able to see the DevOps module. And this is exactly what we solved with this release. So now our DevOps module actually supports all account types. Now, when you go to the user interface of the platform, for those account types, you will find DevOps. A more interesting question is why, right? Why did we add it? And we did that because there is a need in certain cases and for certain customers to create customer-specific extensions for that integrate business flows of a distributor or reseller with their commerce systems, right? And obviously, this is already not a fulfillment automation extension. It's a different scenario because it's not passive per se, it's active because it places orders from the system and the platform. And for that, we created a separate type of extension that we call Hub Integration. So now, with this feature, a typical scenario would be that vendors, when they need a specific extension, they develop a fulfillment automation extension. And for distributors and resellers, you have Hub Integration extension. We will have a separate training to show you the process of development for those extensions, because that's definitely something that doesn't fit into this 1 hour training for the release. But again, conceptually, I hope you understand what it is. Another thing that we've developed with this release is called multi-account extensions. Now, this is something that requires a bit of the explanation. So we have our regular landscape of actors, right? Vendors, distributors, resellers, and they all have their own systems, right? Vendors have systems of their own, distributors have systems of their own, and just like we've discussed, right, you either develop a fulfillment automation extension here, or you develop a commerce hub integration extension here, right? So this will be a typical hub integration. This will be a typical fulfillment extension. And while it's all nice and awesome, but developers make those integrations possible, right? Developers create those extensions. And there's a very important question that we need to ask ourselves, how do they develop those? And when you look at this, there are actually 2 different modes of development, per se, that developers might follow. Some of those extensions are one-offs, and they are implemented for a specific partner or project, right? Let's say when you develop a fulfillment automation for Microsoft Office, you create extension just for this product, right? Or when you create an integration for an ERP system of American Mobile, you're only creating the integration for this specific system. But on the other hand, there is a bunch of extensions or integrations that you develop with the idea of being reused by multiple partners, right? That generic integration with a notification system of certain type, right? And the same extension will be used by multiple partners. And up until now, we didn't really support that kind of extension. So again, just to compare them, those custom one-off extensions are typically used by single partner, while generic extensions are typically used and modified by multiple partners. When it comes to the actual, the way those teams are charging for development, typically when it comes to one-offs, they would charge for their time and efforts, right? It's time and material based billing and development for their services. While in those reusable extensions, typically some form of licensing that they're just charging their partners. Same comes to certification. When it comes to custom extensions development, those teams are mostly interested to certify their developers rather than certifying the extension, right? And while in those reusable extensions, they're mostly interested in certifying the actual integration of the developed extension. And up until now, we were not supporting those types of extensions natively. Of course, it was possible to create certain extension and fork it for each and every customer, but still it was not efficient. And with this release, we've added a very important type of extension that we call a multi-account extension. So this type of extension allows developers to create reusable applications, essentially that automate various scenarios, business scenarios for our partners. So to explain it in a more visual form, with this type of extension, vendors can develop an extension and publish it to the DevOps module, which later will be installed and used by multiple accounts in the platform. So in the previous, with all previous types of extensions, the same actor that deployed it used it, right? So you create an extension for vendor for fulfillment automation and it runs in the scope of the same account. With this type of extension, it could be activated to be used in multiple accounts, and that's very important. And well, the business scenario becomes much more complex, obviously, once it crosses the border of the account for multiple reasons. For example, obviously, we have an extension in the account that develops that extension right now. And with DevOps module, we have all the environments and operational procedures that we support for dev environment, stage production, right, with links to source code repositories, etc. So first thing that we've created with this release related to those extensions is an extensions catalog, right? So it is now possible to publish an extension created in DevOps in the extensions catalog, and it will become visible in the catalog in case you want to make it public. We've published a few initial extensions to this catalog, and obviously this catalog will grow over time. We also introduced the concept of installation, right? So this extension could now be installed in another account, and it could be installed from the public catalog, or it could be installed using the private invitation code, basically, right? So a vendor can invite another account if, for whatever reason, they don't want to publish this extension to public catalog, so they can share a private invite, and another account can redeem this code and basically activate this extension, which is, again, if you ever worked with, let's say, Apple developers community, is very common. A lot of applications, they never get even to the App Store, and they are being transacted bypassing the App Store through their test lab invites. And with this feature, we basically introduced the user interface integration capabilities, which allow those extensions to plug to different parts of the user interface in our platform in order to actually implement those scenarios. Kind of let me briefly walk you through the process of extension installation, both through the public catalog and test labs. So with this feature, again, we enhance the product extensions catalog. And if you go to the integrations module, and over there to extensions, you will now see the catalog of extensions. Right? And if you click at that extensions catalog, you will actually see the install button. And this is the public flow, obviously, right? So if your extension is published to the catalog, then anyone who can see the catalog can request installation of this extension. Alternatively, there is a way to redeem the activation code. Like I said, if you work with the developer and they share with you this activation code, you can use it to achieve the same effect as with public catalog. For that, in that case, developers don't need to publish anything to public catalog. And this is the private application route, basically. Right, so once this account chooses to install the extension, it presents which permissions will be granted to the specific extension. So you can think of this as application being activated on that scope and token being allocated for that application to work with your account. Right, you can basically do all that manually by going to API tokens and allocating one. Then on the developer side, all of those installations are tracked. So as a developer, you can now go to this extension and see the list of installations. And you can even assign those installations to different environments, which is a separate topic if you want to work with some account for testing and other purposes. But more importantly, you will see which accounts installed your extension, you will see who installed it when, and you can even associate some configuration with that account if you want. What else is here? Well, let me show you the actual experience of extension activation for some simple case, because again, I just want to give you the sense of what's in the platform. So for this specific extension, well, let's go to this account, Connect Demos. And like I said, in order to get to this functionality, we need to go to the integrations module and integrations to extensions, right? So we can click at extensions and select an extension for installation here. So we've published a few sample extensions here, like this Telegram notifications extension. So once in this extension, I, as a user, can click this install button, right? So we click install button. And well, like I said, it's basically installs this extension in this account. Now, once this is done, kind of a few things have happened in this account now. So first of all, we will see, well, we should see at least that it plugged into user interface. 1 second. Let's go to extensions and we'll go to Telegram extension and click open set. Right, we can now see that it integrated into the settings of the platform itself. Again, doesn't look like much, but it is actually a very important thing. That now this extension plugged into the section of the user interface of the platform itself. And well, this is where you can set up your Telegram integration. I don't have a token right now handy. Let me skip this process. You can actually do it for your own account later, if you don't mind. But just like with APS extensions back in the day in the CloudBlue Connect platform, right now it is possible for developers to build sections of the user interface in the platform, plug them to different places of the user interface. So it's now possible, for example, to create an extension specific to, let's say, Microsoft for analytics that will plug into here, or kind of similar kind of things. I hope this makes sense. Again, and I don't want to overwhelm you too much. Laura is asking, who drives the conversation with the partner to implement custom extensions to accommodate partner-specific scenarios? Well, that should be our professional services team. That's the whole idea, right? So kind of conceptually, that's just the CSD work, custom software development, that our professional services team should drive. That's why one of the main consumers for all of this functionality in our company is expected to be the professional services team, right, that builds those partner-specific scenarios and integrations. Now, well, we are right down to 1 hour, and that's our primary objective, to actually fit into 1 hour always, right? So that, we will schedule separate trainings that will be specific to other features in this release, because they just don't fit into 1 hour training, and we don't want to make it overly complex. So we'll have a separate meeting for localization, and we will record all of them and publish recordings. So if you cannot attend, don't worry. Right? We will have a separate discussion related to extensions for developers, including the extension for Anvil that allows you to build user interfaces, customer-facing ones. And we will have a separate conversation around dynamic product parameters constraints and what it allows you to do now. Because again, each of those topics deserves another 20, 30 minutes at least. And we didn't want to push it all into this 1 hour training. And as always, if you want to learn more, please visit our community portal, first and foremost at connect.cloudblue.com. And you can start with our release notes and kind of traverse around the documentation. You can visit our YouTube. We don't have videos related to the features of this release yet. We will work on them. I'm pretty sure we will have them. So kind of in a few weeks, expect those videos to be there. Well, and you can always talk to us, right? To anyone from CloudBlue Connect team, from me to Anthony, Mark, Bo, and anyone in the team will be happy to answer any of your questions.